the iron gate closed in her face, not slowly, not with ceremony. With the deliberate indifference of someone who has already decided that someone no longer exists and wants that person to feel it in their chest before taking the first step. Sylvie felt it. For 60 years she had been the Luna of this kingdom, not because of the title, because of what the title meant. The woman who stood firm when councils fell apart, who held the hand of a good king on the nights when being good came at a cost, who knew every stone of this ground, every family of this people, every promise that kept this place standing. And her grandson, flesh of her flesh, looked at all of it and said, "Leave," before the council arrived, before anyone could see, before she could speak. Because Marcus knew that if she spoke, if the Luna opened her mouth in front of any witness, what came after would be much harder to explain. She left with an old wooden box under her arm, with 82 years in her knees, with the name of the man who had loved her for 60 years still warming the inside of her chest, a man who had left in that great winter and taken with him the only protection she had. Or so she believed. Because there is an attic in an old stone house at the edge of the eastern forest. And inside that attic, in the dark, in the silence, waiting for 40 years, something pulses, like a heart that has not forgotten her name, like a secret that a meticulous, impossible king left hidden exactly where she would need to find it. Like the answer to a question Marcus never thought to ask. What does a good man do when he knows he won't be there to protect the woman he loves? He plans. And Sylvie is about to discover how much. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The worn wooden box landed on the stone floor with a sound that rang through the entire courtyard. And Sylvie, the Luna of the kingdom, did not flinch. She had made that decision somewhere between the second hallway and the top of the grand staircase. She would not give Marcus the satisfaction of watching her hands shake, so they didn't. She set the box down with deliberate care, straightened the pine green wool shawl across her shoulders. The color Eldon always said made her eyes look like deep water, and turned to face her grandson with the particular stillness of a woman who has carried a kingdom on her back for 60 years and knows, in the marrow of her bones, exactly how much she is worth. Marcus stood at the top of the front steps with his arms crossed and his chin lifted, wearing the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his bedroom mirror and was now discovering that the real thing had considerably more gravity. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the strong jaw of his grandfather and none of his grandfather's soul. That had always been the quiet tragedy of Marcus. The packaging was exactly right, and everything inside was wrong. "The council will be here by dusk," he said. "It would be better if you weren't here when they arrive." Sylvie held his gaze without blinking. "And if I stay?" Something shifted in his eyes then, not rage, but something sharper and less comfortable. Closer to fear wearing the mask of ambition. "The Alliance needs to see change," he said, his voice dropping just enough to carry the weight of a warning. "And you, grandmother, are the only thing left in this house that still smells like his rain." The words landed like a slap dressed up as a statement of fact. Sylvie let them sit in the air between them, ugly, exposed, impossible to take back, for exactly 3 seconds. "Your grandfather," she said at last, her voice quieter than the wind moving through the courtyard oaks, "built everything you are standing on, every stone, every alliance, every promise that keeps this kingdom breathing." She picked up the worn wooden box from the floor, tucked it under her arm with the unhurried ease of a woman who has never once needed to rush to make a point. "And you are burning it down because you are afraid of an 82-year-old woman." Marcus said nothing. That, more than anything, told her everything. Sylvie walked through the gate. She told herself she would not look back. She looked back once, just once, and the iron gate was already closing. But in the very last sliver of space before iron met stone, she caught it. A faint silver shimmer tracing the gate's upper arch, there and gone in less than a breath. Like moonlight recognizing itself in still water. Like something ancient and watchful, opening one slow eye. The Luna has left the territory. The shimmer seemed to say to the stones and the oaks and the old cold air, "Let the covenant answer." Sylvie turned her face to the road and kept walking. The eastern forest received her the way old places receive people they have been quietly expecting. The afternoon light filtered through the tall oaks in long amber columns, warm against her cheek, entirely indifferent to the fact that her life had just been reduced to what fit inside a worn wooden box. She walked at her own pace, which was, she would acknowledge privately, somewhat slower than it used to be, while her knees registered their opinions about the uneven road with considerable and ongoing eloquence. The box held a wool shawl, a silver hairbrush engraved with EA, Eldon Alpha, her king, her North Star for 60 years, a dried sprig of winter sage from their wedding morning, still faintly fragrant against her palm, and a letter, folded and sealed, that she had not yet opened. She would open it. Just not yet. Not while her chest still felt like something that might crack if she breathed too quickly. She had made it perhaps a mile past the ridge when the sound reached her, a sharp, rhythmic clicking, like someone aggressively speed knitting while conducting a one-sided argument with great personal conviction. She slowed. There, seated on a fallen oak beside the path, was a woman roughly her own age, wearing a coat the color of a spectacularly bad decision. Deep mustard yellow, large brown buttons, completely unapologetic, clicking two wooden walking sticks together with the concentrated energy of someone who has been waiting far longer than is reasonable and has decided to be productive about it. "You must be the Luna," the woman said, without looking up. Sylvie stopped. "How did you—" The shimmer on the gate. The woman looked up at last. Her eyes were pale gray and sharp as midwinter light, the kind of eyes that catalog everything and reveal nothing. When the widow's seal activates, it sends a pulse through the old boundary lines. Every sworn warden still living feels it. Right here. She lifted her left wrist, turning it over to show a faint silver mark on the inside, thin as a thread and already fading at its edges. "I've been on standby for 2 weeks. My name is Dot. My hip has filed a formal grievance, and I have denied it on the grounds of historical necessity." Sylvie stared at the mark. "The widow's seal," she said slowly. "I thought that was a myth, something the old wardens told to frighten ambitious heirs." Dot raised one eyebrow with the elegant precision of someone who has been waiting a long time to raise it. "Yes, well, ambitious heirs tend to prefer that interpretation." "Clearly," Sylvie said, and something small and involuntary, not quite a smile, not yet, moved at the corner of her mouth. "Ancient covenant," Dot continued, falling into step beside Sylvie as naturally as if they had been walking this road together for years. "When a Luna is widowed and then wrongfully expelled from her territory, the seal activates. Everything Marcus has done since your husband's passing, every order, every claim, every move toward succession, is legally suspended under covenant law until the full council convenes and you are heard." Her walking sticks found their rhythm against the path. "He cannot take the throne while you are Luna. He knows this, which is precisely why he needed you to appear to have left willingly. A Luna who walks away of her own accord is different, under the old law, from a Luna who is cast out." A measured pause. He miscalculated which one he actually did. Sylvie walked in silence for a moment, turning this over. "Eldon knew," she said finally. Not a question. "He wrote to all 3 wardens still living, a month before the great winter." Dot's voice gentled almost imperceptibly. He spent his last weeks making sure you would not face what came after alone. The tightness in Sylvie's throat became something she had to actively and carefully manage. He never told me. He didn't want you preparing for loss, Dot said simply. He wanted you to have time to just be his wife. Sylvie looked straight ahead at the road, at the trees, at the amber light doing its quiet, indifferent, beautiful work between the branches. Stubborn, infuriating man, she said. With exceptional taste in wives, Dot replied, without missing a single beat. The warden's house emerged from the tree line as the last amber light dissolved into deep, still blue, heavy stone walls, narrow windows, a roof that had endured 40 hard winters with the stubborn integrity of something that has simply decided it is not falling down, and that is final. Dot pushed the front door open with one walking stick and entered as though she had personally overseen the original construction. Fireplace works, wood is stacked, tea is real. Not that powdered indignity Marcus's kitchens have been serving since the good cook retired. A match was already struck, flame already finding the kindling. I brought biscuits, the proper kind, not the ones from the lower market that taste like someone's disappointment. Sylvie stepped inside and paused. The room was small, cold, but warming quickly as the fire spread its light across the old stone walls. It smelled of cedar, of decades, and of something else layered underneath both, something luminous and faintly alive, like the air in a room where a promise was made a very long time ago and never broken. The feeling was strongest near the narrow staircase in the far corner, the one that rose to a low wooden door at the top, the attic. She set her box on the table. "What's up there?" she asked. Dot was quiet for one beat too long, the kind of pause that carries real weight. "Everything Eldon left you," she said at last. "The warden's scroll, the full succession covenant, proof that not one stone of that kingdom legally belongs to Marcus while the seal holds." She paused, arranging biscuits on a cloth with more focus than the task strictly required. "And something else, something he said you would recognize the moment you saw it. He wouldn't explain further." Her pale gray eyes met Sylvie's across the fire-lit room. "He just said, 'She'll know.'" Sylvie looked at the staircase. From behind that low wooden door at the top came a sound so faint it might have been nothing more than old timber settling into a cold night. Except that it was too steady for that, too warm, too patient. A single, slow pulse, rhythmic and deep, like a heartbeat that had been keeping its own time in the dark for a very long while, waiting, with the particular certainty of something that has never once doubted the person it was waiting for. Not tonight. Dot appeared at her elbow with a cup of tea and a biscuit, radiating the unshakable authority of a woman who has appointed herself chief of operations and does not intend to be challenged on the matter. Tonight the Luna eats, tonight the Luna sleeps. She pressed the cup firmly into Sylvie's hands. That attic has kept its secrets for 40 years. One more night will not trouble it. And if I let you charge up those stairs on an empty stomach and you fall and break something, we will both be laid up. And I refuse to let this kingdom's fate rest on two women with matching bad hips. Sylvie looked at her for a long moment. "You are a very strange woman," she said. Dot settled into the chair by the fire with great satisfaction. "Strange women get things done, Luna. The sensible ones just get managed." She bit decisively into her biscuit. "Now sit. Your knees have been through enough for one day." Sylvie sat. The fire breathed warmth into the old stone walls around them, and outside, the first stars appeared in the narrow windows, cold and bright and ancient. And above, patient as the moon itself, something kept its steady rhythm behind the attic door. Pulsing, waiting, certain. The night had passed without her noticing, or perhaps she had slept so deeply that she noticed nothing at all. Either way, when Sylvie opened her eyes, the room was the particular shade of gray that exists only in the minutes just before dawn, when the dark has already decided to leave, but the light has not yet committed to arriving. The fire had burned down to embers. Dot's expressive breathing drifted steadily from the other side of the room, and from above, from behind the attic door at the top of the narrow stairs, the pulse continued, steady, patient. If anything, slightly more insistent than it had been the night before, the way a knock becomes a knock and a half when the person on the other side suspects you might be pretending not to hear. Sylvie sat up, found her shawl, and put on her boots. Somewhere in the kingdom's great house, Marcus would be waking to a breakfast he had not earned, in a chair he could not legally hold, issuing orders that, if the widow's seal meant what Dot said it meant, were worth considerably less than the breath it took to speak them. She thought about that for a moment, let herself feel the cold satisfaction of it. Then she crossed the room, found the narrow staircase, and began to climb. The steps were worn smooth in the center from decades of feet that no longer existed to remember climbing them. Sylvie took them one at a time. Her knees had opinions before sunrise, as they always did, and she had long since learned that arguing with them was a losing proposition. She kept one hand on the wall. The cedar smell thickened with every step, and beneath it, something else entirely. Warm metal, old paper, and the electric stillness of a room that has been sealed for a very long time and is about to stop being sealed. The attic door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stopped. She had expected dust, disorder, 40 years of accumulated abandonment. Instead, the attic was clean in the way that ancient places sometimes hold themselves together through sheer accumulated will. Preserved, deliberate, untouched, not from neglect, but from intention. A single window in the far wall faced east. The first pale shaft of morning light came through it in one long, level line and fell directly onto a low table at the room's center, as though the window had been placed there precisely for this morning, this light, this moment. On the table, a scroll, bound in dark leather and sealed with silver wax. Beside it, a small iron box no larger than her two fists together. And beside that, laid flat and still, as though someone had set it down only moments ago and stepped away, Eldon's ring, not the council ring, not the Alpha King's formal seal that the kingdom knew, the other one. The plain silver band he had worn on his right hand every single day of their marriage, the one he called his real ring, the one that meant nothing official and everything that mattered. The one she had watched them fold into his hands before the great winter closed over him. The one that should, by every law of nature and of grief and of common sense, be in the ground with him. Sylvie's hand went to her mouth. Her feet moved before she made any conscious decision to move them. She reached for the ring. And the moment her fingers closed around it, warm and solid and impossibly, painfully real against her palm, the pulse she had been hearing all night shifted entirely. Not from above, not from the table, from her own wrist. She looked down. On the inside of her left wrist, tracing itself into existence like ink finding its way through still water, a silver mark bloomed. The same thread-like shape she had seen on Dot's wrist the evening before, but larger. More intricate. Where Dot's had been a single line, hers branched and spread like a river seen from a great height, like roots reaching through dark soil, like the underside of every promise ever made between a Luna and her kingdom over 60 years of keeping faith. It was warm, not painfully, warmly, like a hand holding hers from somewhere just out of reach. Eldon, she thought, and could not have said whether it was grief or recognition, or something that had no clean name yet. "Well," said Dot's voice from the doorway, slightly winded from the stairs and thoroughly unbothered about it. "There it is. Full seal activation. That is the strongest Luna impression I have seen in 30 years of warden service." A pause in which she visibly catalogued the entire room and found it satisfactory. "Also, you left without waking me, and I want that acknowledged as a personal betrayal." "You snore," Sylvie said without turning around. "I breathe expressively," Dot said with great dignity. There is a documented difference." She crossed the room and came to stand beside Sylvie, and for a moment, both women simply looked at the table, at the scroll, the iron box, and the plain silver ring warm in Sylvie's closed hand. Then Dot said more quietly, "Open the scroll first." The silver seal broke cleanly, the wax falling in two neat pieces as though it had been waiting for precisely this pressure at precisely this angle. Sylvie unrolled the leather-bound scroll across the table, and Eldon's handwriting met her. Large, deliberate, the hand of a man who wrote as he did everything else, with full intention and no wasted motion. "To my Sylvie, the Luna of my heart and of this kingdom. If you are reading this, then the great winter has come and gone, and Marcus has done what I feared he would. I am sorry I could not protect you from that morning. I am not sorry for the 60 years before it." Sylvie stopped. She breathed. She kept reading. The scroll laid it out with the precision of a man who had spent his final weeks thinking of very little else. The widow's seal, its full legal weight under covenant law, the names of the 3 wardens, the exact language that suspended every act of succession made after his death, and at the bottom, underlined twice in Eldon's firm and deliberate hand, "The iron box requires the Luna's seal to open. What is inside belongs to this kingdom, and to you. Do not let Marcus near it. He already knows it exists. That knowledge is part of why he moved so quickly. He needed you gone before you had the chance to find it. He will not stop, Sylvie. He is not a cruel man by nature, but he has made a home in his ambition, and that is more dangerous than cruelty, because he will always find a reason to justify the next step." Sylvie read that last paragraph twice. Eldon had known his grandson, perhaps better than Marcus had known himself, and still it had not made him cruel in return. Only careful, only thorough, only relentlessly, exasperatingly prepared. She pressed her marked wrist to the iron box's surface. The lock opened with a sound like a single clean note struck on a very old bell, resonant, unhurried, hanging in the attic air long after it should have faded. Inside, nested in aged cloth, a smaller and older scroll, its edges dark with time. And, beneath it, a formal document bearing the full seal of the Alpha King's Council. Every elder's mark, every warden's signature, dated 3 months before the Great Winter. Dot leaned in, read the heading, went absolutely still. When she spoke, her voice was stripped entirely of its usual weaponized humor. And that absence, Sylvie was beginning to understand, was the surest signal that something was truly serious. "This is the decree of Regency," Dot said, "signed and ratified by the full council in private session. Eldon didn't just write letters, Sylvie. He convened the elders in secret and had this formally recorded under covenant law." She looked up, pale gray eyes steady and intent. "Until his younger grandson comes of age, you hold sole regency authority over every decision of this kingdom. Every order Marcus has issued since your husband's death is legally void. He has no standing, not one stone." The morning light through the east window had grown full and level while they read, falling warm across the table, across the scroll and the box, and Eldon's ring still pressed inside Sylvie's closed fist. She stood with that for a moment. Let it move through her the way deep things move, not with a crash, but with a slow, irresistible settling, like bedrock finding its place. Then Marcus's voice came back to her, low and certain in the courtyard. "You are the only thing left in this house that still smells like his reign." He had meant it as a dismissal. He had not understood, not even slightly, that he was describing her authority. "Sylvie." Dot's voice sharp and quiet. Her pale eyes had gone to the east window. "There is someone at the tree line." Sylvie moved to the window, at the edge of the eastern forest, where the old boundary road broke from the trees into open ground. A figure stood in the full morning light, tall, absolutely still, dressed in the deep gray of the outer territories, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a long time learning the difference between being seen and being noticed, and has chosen this morning to be seen. He was looking directly at the warden's house. Sylvie studied his face from the distance of the attic window. She had spent 60 years as Luna, making it her business to know every face in this kingdom. She had sat across council tables from men whose fathers' names she also knew. She had a memory for faces the way some people have a memory for music. Precise, involuntary, permanent. She did not know this man, and yet the silver mark on her wrist pulsed, once sharply, with a quality entirely different from the warm, steady rhythm it had held all morning. Not a warning, not fear. Something more unsettling than either. A recognition, as though some part of her that predated memory already knew exactly who was standing at the edge of that forest, and had been waiting, with considerable patience, for the rest of her to catch up. "Dot?" Sylvie said, her voice very level. "Who is that?" A long pause. "I have no idea," Dot said. Then, after a beat, "But my hip just stopped hurting entirely." She paused. In 30 years of warden service, that has meant one of two things. Another pause, slightly longer. "I will not tell you which two things. You will find out soon enough, and I want to see your face." Sylvie did not wait for Dot to finish her sentence. She was already moving, down the attic stairs, one hand on the wall, her knees registering their opinions at considerable volume, which she ignored entirely. She tucked Eldon's ring into the pocket of her shawl as she descended, her fingers curling around it once before she let it go, and by the time she reached the ground floor and pushed open the warden's house front door, the morning air hit her face like cold water, sharp, clean, and fully awake. The man was still there, closer now, she realized, than he had appeared from the attic window. He had crossed perhaps half the distance between the tree line and the house while she descended, moving with the unhurried, ground-covering stride of someone who has walked long distances for a very long time and no longer thinks about it. He stopped when he saw her appear in the doorway. Not startled, simply stopping, the way a person stops when they have arrived where they intended to be. He was older than she had first thought. Not her age. No one was quite her age, she sometimes felt, or at least no one who had lived the same number of years in the same number of ways. But he was not young. His hair was silver white, close-cropped, and his face had the particular quality of someone who had been through considerable weather. Not beaten by it, but shaped by it, the way good timber is shaped. He carried no weapons she could see. His gray coat bore the insignia of the outer territories. Specifically, she now recognized the Eastern Ridge settlements, 3 days' walk from the kingdom's boundary. He stopped 10 feet from the door and looked at her with dark, steady eyes. "Luna Sylvie," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying easily in the cold morning air. "My name is Calder. I was your husband's oldest friend." A pause, measured, careful. "He wrote to me as well." Behind Sylvie, Dot appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, walking sticks in hand, taking in the scene with the alert attention of a woman running rapid calculations. "Of course he did," Dot said, to no one in particular. Thorough, beautiful, infuriating man. They sat around the fire with tea, real tea, as Dot had promised. While Calder spoke, he did not rush. He was, Sylvie was already beginning to understand, a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that some things take the time they take, and that hurrying them produces nothing but broken edges. He and Eldon had grown up together in the outer eastern settlements, before Eldon was called to the kingdom's seat, before the title of Alpha King settled on his shoulders like a stone cloak that never quite came off. They had trained together, hunted together, argued about everything with the ferocious commitment of two people who trust each other enough to be completely disagreeable. And then Eldon's path had taken him one way, and Calder's another, and 40 years had passed the way 40 years do, quickly in retrospect, and not at all quickly while they were happening. He wrote to me 6 weeks before the great winter, Calder said, turning his cup slowly in both hands. Not just a letter, a full account. What he suspected Marcus would do, what the decree of regency contained, where the warden's house stood. He looked at Sylvie steadily, and what he needed from me after. What did he need? Sylvie asked. Calder met her eyes. A warden at large, someone outside the official three with no formal covenant tie that Marcus could legally challenge or pressure. Someone who could move freely through the outer territories and carry information, or, if necessary, carry the Luna herself, without triggering the kingdom's boundary protocols. He paused. He asked if I was willing. And you said yes, Sylvie said. I said yes before I finished reading the letter, Calder said simply. The fire crackled between them. Outside, a wind moved through the eastern oaks, and the warden's house settled around them with the quiet solidity of old stone that has heard many conversations and kept all of them. Dot, who had been uncharacteristically silent for the better part of 3 minutes, a personal record by Sylvie's estimation, leaned forward and pointed one walking stick at Calder with the precision of someone making a parliamentary motion. You walked 3 days from the eastern ridge, she said. Yes, Calder said. In 4 days. A very brief pause. The second day was long. Dot leaned back, visibly satisfied. I like him, she said to Sylvie. He lies efficiently. That's a useful quality in difficult times. Calder looked at Dot for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectations of the situation. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the structural ancestor of one. Eldon mentioned you, he said. Favorably, I hope, Dot said. He said, and I quote directly, Dot will be the most useful person in the room and the most dangerous to your composure. Learn to work with both. Dot pressed one hand to her heart with an expression of genuine emotion. That, she announced, is the kindest thing anyone has ever said about me. Sylvie felt something move in her chest, warm and complicated, the specific ache of laughing and grieving at the same time, which she was discovering was not as contradictory as it sounded. They were still sitting with that warmth when the sound reached them. Horses, more than 2. Moving on the eastern road at a pace that was not the pace of travelers. Calder was on his feet before Sylvie fully processed the sound, moving to the window with a speed and quietness that did not match the unhurried man who had walked through her door 40 minutes ago. He looked out, said nothing for 2 full seconds, then turned back. 4 riders, he said. Kingdom colors. Marcus. Not in person. He was too careful for that, Sylvie understood immediately, too practiced at letting other people carry the exposure of his decisions. But his riders, his colors, his reach extending out here to the Eastern Territory before she had even been gone a full day. He already knows it exists, Eldon's letter had said. He will not stop. Sylvie stood. The silver mark on her wrist pulsed, not the warm, steady rhythm of recognition, but something sharper, more deliberate, like a key turning in a lock. What does the seal actually do? She said to Dot. When someone crosses into the Luna's protected territory without authorization. Dot blinked. Theoretically, it refuses them. Theoretically. It has not been tested in living memory. Well, Sylvie said, straightening her shawl with the precise, deliberate movement she had used 10,000 times in council chambers when she needed her hands to be steady while everything else was not. Today appears to be a good day for historical precedent. She opened the front door and walked out to meet them. The 4 riders pulled up short at the edge of the clearing, sharply, their horses sidestepping with the sudden nervousness of animals that have encountered something their instincts do not have a category for. The lead rider was young, in kingdom livery, with the professionally blank expression of someone delivering a message he did not write and would prefer not to be associated with. Luna Sylvie, he said, with a correctness that suggested someone had drilled the title into him specifically for this encounter. By order of Marcus, first heir of the Alpha King's line, You are requested to— Requested, Sylvie said pleasantly. The rider paused. Required to surrender the contents of the warden's house and return to the kingdom seat for— He stopped. Not because Sylvie spoke. Because the silver mark on her wrist had flared. Warm, then bright, visible even through the sleeve of her shawl. A steady silver light that spread from her wrist to her hand, and then, without drama, without noise, simply extended outward, tracing the boundary of the warden's house clearing in a thin, unbroken line of light at ground level. The horses would not cross it. All four of them stopped dead at the line, hooves at its edge, ears flat, absolutely immovable. Not panicked, simply stopped, the way animals stop at something they recognize as older and more authoritative than anything a rider's heel can override. The lead rider looked down at the line of silver light, then at Sylvie, then back at the line. The widow's seal, he said, in a voice that had lost all of its official composure, is real. Yes, Sylvie said with the particular calm of a woman who has just watched 82 years of quiet dignity become a weapon. It is. And everything inside this boundary is under Regency protection until the full council convenes. She held his gaze. You may tell Marcus that I received his message, and that I have one of my own. She paused. Tell him his grandfather was thorough. The rider stared at her for one long moment. Then he turned his horse around. All four of them left at considerably more speed than they had arrived. Behind Sylvie, the sound of a walking stick tapping twice on the doorstep announced Dot's presence. I have been a warden for 30 years, Dot said, her voice carrying the specific reverence of someone who has just witnessed something they will describe to people for the rest of their lives. I have never seen the seal activate at full boundary strength. A pause. Sylvie? Yes? Eldon didn't just leave you a legal document. Dot's voice was very quiet now. He left you the most powerful covenant protection in the history of this kingdom. Another pause. That man was absolutely insufferably prepared for everything. Sylvie looked down at her wrist. The silver light had faded back to its quiet thread-like mark, warm against her skin, patient and steady. Yes, she said softly. He was. And for the first time since the iron gate had closed behind her, the weight in her chest shifted. Not gone, not even close to gone, but different. Lighter by precisely the amount that purpose adds when it arrives to keep grief company. She turned back to the house. Calder was standing in the doorway, watching her with those dark, steady eyes. He said nothing, but something in his expression, careful, intent, and trying very hard not to be anything more than careful and intent, made the silver mark on her wrist pulse once. Warm, quiet, noticing. The riders were barely out of sight when Dot announced that everyone needed breakfast, that decisions made on empty stomachs were historically unreliable, and that she had, with considerable foresight, packed enough provisions for 3 days, which she acknowledged was either excellent planning or a confession that she had expected company. You expected him, Sylvie said, nodding toward Calder as she came back inside. I expected someone, Dot said, already moving toward the small kitchen with the focused energy of a woman who processes significant events through the medium of food preparation. Eldon's letters had a certain thoroughness to them. I assumed he wouldn't leave you with just one old woman and 2 bad hips between you and whatever Marcus tried next. The sound of a pan finding a hook. I simply did not anticipate that the someone would be quite so tall. Calder, who was adding wood to the fire with his back to the room, said nothing, but the set of his shoulders suggested he had heard perfectly well. Sylvie sat at the table, set the worn wooden box beside her, and opened Eldon's letter properly for the first time. She had been carrying it since the courtyard, through the gate, down the eastern road, through the night, through the attic, through 4 of Marcus's riders turning their horses around. She had kept it folded and sealed because she had known, with the particular knowledge of someone who has been married for 60 years, that whatever was inside it would require her to be sitting down and preferably not in immediate danger. Now, she was sitting down. The immediate danger had, for the moment, retreated. She broke the seal. My Sylvie, by the time you read this, you will already have been braver than I had any right to ask. I know this because I know you, which is the great privilege and the great comfort of 60 years. I need to tell you something I should have said while I still could. You spent our marriage believing that you served this kingdom because of me, because of the title, because of the obligation that came with loving an alpha king. You are wrong. This kingdom held together because of you. The alliances, the trust, the long memory of what this land is supposed to be. That was your work, Sylvie. I was the name on the documents. You were the reason the documents meant anything. What I have left you is not a burden. It is a homecoming. The kingdom already knows who you are. Let it remember. I love you. I have loved you since the first winter we spent arguing about the East Road repairs, and I will love you in whatever comes after this. Be well, be fierce, and please, let yourself be happy again. I mean that, not eventually. Soon. Eldon Sylvie read it twice. Then she folded it with great care, pressed it flat against her palm for one long moment, and set it beside the ring. She did not cry. She had made that decision. But her hands, for just a moment, were not quite steady. And she let them be unsteady, because Eldon had asked her to be honest. And this was honest. Across the room, Dot said nothing, which was the kindest thing she could have done. Calder, who had turned from the fire at some point and was now sitting in the chair near the window, was looking at the middle distance with the deliberate thoughtfulness of a man who is giving someone privacy in a room with no walls to hide behind. It was, Sylvie thought, a particular skill, a considerate one. He wrote to you as well, she said. What did he say? Calder looked at her. He said you would need someone who knew the outer territories, someone who could carry messages to the Eastern elders before Marcus could reach them. He paused. He also said, another pause, this one more careful. He said that you had spent 60 years taking care of everyone else in this kingdom, and that the one thing he regretted was not making sure there was someone to take care of you in return. He held her gaze steadily. He asked me to correct that. The room was quiet for a moment. The fire, the wind outside, the particular quality of silence that settles after something true has been said. That, Sylvie said at last, sounds exactly like him. Organizing things from beyond the grave and leaving everyone else to manage the awkwardness of it. It does have that quality, Calder agreed. And this time the thing at the corner of his mouth made it all the way to an actual expression. Brief, real, transforming his weathered face in a way that was startling in its warmth. Dot appeared from the kitchen with 3 plates, set them on the table with the efficiency of someone who has decided that sentiment has had its allotted time, and now everyone is going to eat. Right, she said, sitting down and picking up her fork with great purpose. We have approximately 1 day, possibly 2, before Marcus finds another approach. He can't cross the seal boundary, but he can petition the council to convene an emergency session and challenge the decree of regency on procedural grounds. She pointed her fork at the space between Sylvie and Calder in a way that managed to include both of them in the directive. So, we eat, then we plan. Then Calder takes the northern path to the first elder settlement and delivers the decree in person before Marcus's people can get there. A pause. And Sylvie reads the second scroll from the iron box, because I looked at the first line while she was outside, and it contains something none of us have discussed yet, and I have been exercising considerable restraint, not mentioning it. Both Sylvie and Calder looked at her. Dot ate a bite of food with great composure. It mentions a third heir, she said, as though commenting on the weather. One that Marcus does not appear to know exists. The fire crackled. Outside, the eastern oaks moved in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, faint, unhurried, patient, the sound of the old boundary settling back into its ancient quiet. Sylvie reached for the iron box. Her wrist pulsed. "Here we go," it seemed to say. The second scroll was older than the first, older than the warden's house itself, by the feel of it. The parchment darkened at the edges to the color of autumn bark and carrying the particular smell of something that has been kept rather than simply stored. Sylvie unrolled it carefully, both hands flat against the table, and read in silence while Dot ate with pointed patience, and Calder sat very still by the window. The handwriting was not Eldon's. It was older, formal. The looping script of the kingdom's original covenant scribes, the ones who had recorded the first laws when the territory was new, and the Alpha line was just beginning to understand what it had taken on. Sylvie had seen this script before, in the archive rooms, in the oldest ceremony documents, but never outside the kingdom's sealed collection. She read to the bottom. Then she set the scroll flat and looked at the fire for a long moment. "The third heir," she said, "is not Marcus's brother." Dot set down her fork. Calder turned from the window. "Marcus's mother," Sylvie continued, her voice measured and careful, "was not Eldon's only child. 40 years ago, before the kingdom's seat, before the formal Alpha line was established, Eldon had a son, born in the outer eastern settlements." She looked up. "Born to a woman he loved before duty called him elsewhere. A woman he never stopped providing for quietly, in ways that left no official record." She paused. "That son is now 58 years old. He has a daughter. She is of age. And under the original covenant law, which predates every succession amendment Marcus has been citing, a Luna-born grandchild through a firstborn son outranks every claim through the female line, regardless of gender." The room absorbed this in silence. Then Dot said very quietly, "Eldon had another child. Yes. For 40 years. Yes." A very long pause. "That man," Dot said, with an expression that moved through several emotions in quick succession before settling somewhere between exasperated and devastated, "was the most comprehensively private person I have ever encountered in my entire life, and I say that with complete admiration and significant personal injury." Calder had stood up from the window. He was looking at Sylvie with an expression she couldn't fully read. Careful, intent, and underneath both of those things, something that looked very much like concern directed specifically at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a direct question. No ceremony around it, no careful framing, just the question, asked plainly, as though her answer actually mattered, and he intended to listen to it. Sylvie considered. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am discovering my husband was even more complicated than 60 years led me to believe. And I think—" She stopped. "I think he handled it the way he handled everything. As carefully as he could, as honestly as the circumstances allowed." She looked back at the scroll. "And I think he spent 40 years carrying that weight alone, which was very like him, and very unnecessary. And I cannot be angry at a man who loved me the way he loved me and is no longer here to be argued with about it." Dot reached across the table and put her hand over Sylvie's. "For what it's worth," Dot said, her sharp voice gone entirely soft for exactly one sentence. "He talked about you constantly, every letter, every message, every time." She squeezed once, then withdrew her hand and picked up her fork again, because sentiment had clearly reached its boundary. "Right. The granddaughter. We need to find her before Marcus does." "Marcus doesn't know she exists," Calder said. "Marcus didn't know the decree of regency existed either," Sylvie said, "and he still moved faster than we expected." She rolled the scroll carefully and returned it to the iron box. "He will find out. And when he does—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They were still at the table, the iron box between them and the second scroll's implications settling like sediment into still water, when Dot's wrist mark pulsed, not the warm, steady beat of the widow's seal, but a sharp, urgent double tap that made her sit upright and set down her tea with a sound like a small decision being made. "That is a warden alert," she said. "One of the other two is signaling." She pressed her fingers to the mark and closed her eyes for a moment, the way a person presses an ear to a wall to hear through it. Then she opened them, and her pale gray eyes were very bright and not remotely amused. "Marcus has sent riders to the outer villages. Not to the warden's house, to the people. He is telling them." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He is telling them that Sylvie left willingly, that she surrendered the Luna's title in grief, that she declared herself unfit to hold regency and asked Marcus to assume leadership in her name." The fire crackled. Sylvie felt the specific cold of a well-constructed lie. Not the shock of it, but the recognition. The understanding of exactly how it worked, and exactly why it would work, in the mouths of 4 riders covering ground quickly through villages where people were tired and grieving and ready to believe that the world had simply moved on. "He is not wrong that it will be believed," she said, with a steadiness that cost her something. "Not by everyone," Calder said. He had moved to the door, already pulling on his gray coat with the focused efficiency of a man who has identified the next necessary thing and is doing it. The Eastern elders knew Eldon. They knew his mind and his methods. "If I reach them before Marcus's riders do—" "You said 3 days to the Eastern Ridge," Sylvie said. "I said it took me 4 days coming. Going back, I know the path." "Calder," she looked at him, "he will have riders on every main road by now." "I won't use the main roads." Dot pointed a walking stick at him. "You are going to do something impressively reckless, aren't you?" "I prefer efficient," Calder said, and there was that brief, real expression again, warm and contained, there and gone. He picked up the satchel he had arrived with, checked something inside it, then crossed to the table and stood before Sylvie. Close enough that she could smell cold air and cedar and something else, something warm underneath both, like wood smoke in a house that has been lived in for a long time. "I will be back in 3 days," he said. "The boundary holds while the seal is active. Dot knows the secondary warden protocols if Marcus tries anything procedural." He paused. Just a half second. The kind of pause that is not quite long enough to mean anything definite, but not quite short enough to mean nothing. "Eldon trusted you with this kingdom for 60 years. His voice was low and level. "I think you can manage 3 more days." Sylvie looked up at him. The silver mark on her wrist pulsed, that quiet, noticing warmth. "I managed 82 years before you arrived," she said. "I expect I'll survive the interval." Something in his expression shifted, warm and careful, and trying very hard to stay careful. "Yes," he said. "I expect you will." He left. The door closed behind him. The eastern wind took him, and the forest, and the long gray road. Dot waited exactly 4 seconds. "Well," she said with great composure, "that man walked 3 days through winter forest because Eldon asked him to." A pause. "I want you to sit with what that means." "Dot!" "I am simply noting facts," Dot said serenely. "I am a warden. Facts are my area." By midday, the lie had reached the nearest village. They knew because a woman arrived at the warden's house boundary, stopped at the silver line, staring. A baker's widow named Hessa, who had brought bread to the kingdom seat every market day for 30 years, and who had, apparently, decided that the Luna deserved to know what was being said in her name. She stood at the boundary line, bread in both hands, expression caught between worry and determination. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you leave by choice?" Sylvie walked to the boundary line and stopped on her side of it. She thought about 60 years, about every market day she had walked through that village and known these faces, about Eldon's letter, "This kingdom held together because of you," and about the lie currently traveling faster than truth through every road Marcus's riders could reach. She thought about what a Luna actually was. Not a title, not a document. Not a silver mark on a wrist, however ancient and however powerful. A Luna was a promise, made in public, kept in private, honored in both. No, Sylvie said, clearly and without decoration. I did not leave by choice. I was removed from my home by my grandson before the council could convene, in violation of covenant law. She held the woman's gaze. I am the Luna of this kingdom. I hold the decree of regency signed by the full Elder Council, and I intend to be heard. A pause. Would you like to come in for tea? Hessa looked at the silver line on the ground. Can I cross it? Sylvie looked at her wrist. The seal pulsed, warm, deliberate, welcoming. Yes, she said. You can. Hessa stepped across the line, bread in both hands, and the silver light parted for her like water for someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. Dot appeared behind Sylvie's shoulder. I'll put the kettle on, she said. Then, under her breath, with considerable satisfaction, Marcus sent 4 armed riders and got turned back by an old woman's wrist. Then he tried a lie, and a baker's widow walked through it and came for tea. A pause. I genuinely love this job. By the second day, there were 11 people inside the boundary. Not riders, not officials, people. A retired council scribe who had served under Eldon for 20 years and arrived with 3 leather satchels of archived documents and the expression of a man who had been waiting for someone to ask. 2 sisters from the Valley settlement who had known Sylvie since before Marcus was born. A young couple from the northern edge who had heard the writer's version of events and found it, as they put it, unconvincing. A blacksmith named Ord, who said nothing when he arrived, simply handed Sylvie a folded note that read, "We know who you are, Luna," and went to sit by the fire as though he lived there. And Hessa, who had apparently gone home, told 9 people what she had seen and heard, and then come back herself, because, as she explained with the pragmatic clarity of someone who bakes at 4 a.m. and therefore has no patience for inefficiency, someone had to keep making bread, and she might as well do it here. The warden's house, which had been empty for 40 years, was becoming something that Sylvie did not have an immediate word for. Not a court. Too small, too warm, too full of people sitting on the floor and sharing food. Not a refuge. Too purposeful, too alive with the low hum of people who have found each other and are beginning to understand what they can do together. Dot had a word for it. She deployed it on the morning of the second day while surveying the room with her walking sticks and the satisfied expression of a general reviewing a surprisingly competent army. Momentum, she said. Marcus has riders. We have momentum. In my experience, momentum is harder to stop. In your experience, Sylvie said. I have been alive for 79 years, Dot said. I have considerable experience. It was the retired scribe. His name was Pell, and he had the neat, economical manner of a man who had spent his life making precise records and had strong feelings about imprecision, who found it. He had been working through his leather satchels for most of the first day, organizing documents with the focused quiet of someone doing what they love, and on the morning of the second day, he set a single sheet on the table in front of Sylvie with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something fragile. The granddaughter's name is Lyra, he said. She lives in the Ashford settlement, Eastern Edge. Her father is Eldon's son, a man named Corwin who has apparently spent his entire adult life running a small livestock operation and refusing to discuss his parentage with anyone. He paused. She is 23. She has been registered in the outer settlement records since birth. And here, he pointed to a line near the bottom of the document. She is registered under the original covenant naming system, which means she appears in the succession index, which means she was never hidden. Sylvie looked at the line. She was hiding in plain sight, she said. Eldon's approach consistently, Pell said, with the tone of a man who had filed 40 years of Eldon's decisions and recognized the pattern. Marcus will find this, Sylvie said. Marcus's people are looking for hidden records, Pell said. They won't think to look at the public outer settlement registry. Not yet. He picked up the document with care. But soon, Sylvie looked at the iron box on the shelf, the ring beside it, the 2 scrolls inside it, and all the weight of what Eldon had spent his last months arranging. She thought about a woman named Lyra in the Ashford settlement, 23 years old, registered in plain sight, apparently unaware that she was the most important person in the kingdom's succession at this particular moment. She thought about what it would feel like to be found, and told that your entire life was about to change. She thought she might have some useful experience to offer on that subject. When Calder returns, she said, Lyra is the next step. Calder returned on the evening of the 2nd day. Not the 3rd, the 2nd, which meant he had pushed hard through difficult terrain in winter cold, and he arrived at the warden's house boundary just as the last light was leaving the sky, his gray coat dark with the cold, moving with the particular economy of someone whose body is tired and whose intention is not. He stopped at the boundary line. From the doorway, Sylvie watched the seal pulse in the ground beneath him, a long, slow recognition, like a door deciding to open. Then the light parted, and he walked through. 11 people found reasons to be interested in other things as he crossed the room toward her, because the warden's house had, in 2 days, become the kind of place where people understood instinctively what required an audience and what did not. Dot stood up from her chair with great purpose. I need to check something in the kitchen, she announced to no one in particular, and left with both walking sticks and considerable dignity. Calder stopped in front of Sylvie. His face was cold-weathered, his breath still evening out from the road. He smelled of pine and frost, and that warm underneath note she had noticed when he left. Wood smoke, lived in, real. The Eastern Elders have the decree, he said. All 7 settlements. They've been formally notified of the seal's activation and the regency status. He reached into his satchel and produced a folded document, sealed with 7 different marks. Their response. In writing. Unanimous. Sylvie took it, opened it. We recognize Sylvie, the Luna, as sole regent of the Alpha King's kingdom until the council convenes. We do not recognize Marcus's claim. We await the Luna's direction. 7 seals, 7 signatures, 40 years of Eldon's careful relationship building, finally called upon. She folded the document, held it for a moment. You did this in 2 days, she said. The Eastern Elders loved Eldon, Calder said simply. Loving him was not a difficult argument to make. He paused. They also asked about you, specifically. Something in his voice was very careful and very steady. I told them you were well, that you were handling things with characteristic competence. Characteristic, Sylvie said. Their word was formidable. The corner of his mouth, that brief, real warmth. I agreed. The fire behind her cast its light into the room, and outside the first stars were appearing, cold and precise and ancient. Sylvie was aware, with the acute, somewhat startling awareness of a woman who had thought this particular capacity had retired along with several other things, of the distance between them, of how little of it there was, of the warmth of a room that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and the accumulated presence of people who had chosen, against considerable pressure, to be here. Calder, she said. Yes. Eldon asked you to take care of me. She looked at him steadily. I need you to understand that I do not require taking care of. He met her gaze. I know, he said. He knew that too. A pause. I think what he meant was someone to stand beside, not in front of. The silver mark on her wrist pulsed once. Warm. Certain. She did not look away. Neither did he. From the kitchen, Dot's voice carried with perfect clarity through the thin wall. I am still in here. I can hear everything. I want that acknowledged. Sylvie closed her eyes briefly. Calder's quiet laugh, low, real, unhurried, filled the space between them like something that had been waiting for the right moment to exist. "She is exactly as Eldon described," he said. "She is exactly as Eldon described," Sylvie agreed. That night, long after the fire had burned low and the warden's house had settled into the quiet breathing of people at rest, Sylvie sat alone at the table with Eldon's ring in her palm. She turned it slowly in her fingers, the plain silver band worn smooth from 40 years of daily wear, warm even now as though it had never entirely cooled. "Let yourself be happy again," he had written. "Not eventually. Soon." She thought about a man who had walked 2 days of hard road in one because he had promised her husband he would, who had stood beside her at the boundary and not in front of it, who laughed quietly and meant it. She was not ready. She knew that clearly, the way she knew other clear and honest things about herself. But she also knew, and this was new, tender at the edges like something recently discovered, that not ready was different from never. She closed her hand around the ring. Outside, patient as it had always been, the moon rose full and silver over the warden's house and the eastern forest and the old boundary road, lighting everything it touched. The Ashford settlement was 3 hours east on foot. 2, Calder said, if the morning frost had hardened the path enough to hold a steady pace. It had. They left before the village woke, the 4 of them, Sylvie, Calder, Dot, and Pell, who had insisted on coming on the grounds that someone needed to handle the documentation, and he did not trust anyone else to do it correctly. Dot had pointed out that 3 hours of walking on a frozen path was not, strictly speaking, a documentation problem. Pell had pointed out that neither was it a problem for a woman with 2 bad hips. They had walked in comfortable mutual irritation for the first hour and been friends by the second, which Sylvie suspected had been Dot's intention from the start. The eastern forest was different in the early morning, quieter. The frost still blew on the ground between the roots, the air carrying that particular winter clarity that makes distances look shorter than they are and sounds travel farther. Sylvie walked at her own pace, which was no longer the pace she would have chosen, but was the pace her knees provided, and Calder walked beside her without comment or adjustment, matching her stride with the easy naturalness of someone who has long since stopped measuring distance and speed. "You walked this path last night," she said, somewhere in the second hour. "Part of it," he said, "in the dark. The frost reflects moonlight well." She looked at him sideways. "You are either very capable or very reckless." Eldon always said the line between them was thinner than sensible people admitted, Calder said. Eldon also walked into a disputed council session with no guards and a single prepared sentence, Sylvie said. He was not always the most reliable judge of reasonable risk. "What was the sentence?" Calder asked. "I trust everyone in this room, which is why I expect better from all of you." She paused. They voted with him unanimously. He was deeply insufferable about it for approximately 6 months. Calder was quiet for a moment. Then, "He told me that story. He left out the 6 months." "He always left out the parts where he was insufferable," Sylvie said. "It was a significant editorial blind spot." From behind them, without looking up from the frozen path, Dot said, "I am enjoying this conversation enormously and will be requesting that it continue for the remainder of the walk." The Ashford settlement was small and honest, a cluster of stone buildings around a central yard, livestock in the south pen, smoke rising from 4 chimneys in the pale morning air. It smelled of hay and cold earth, and the particular warmth of a place that works hard and doesn't apologize for it. They found Lyra at the fence of the eastern pen, repairing a section of rail with the focused competence of someone who has done this before and will do it again and has made a complete peace with that fact. She was young. Sylvie registered that first, the specific young of someone who has not yet had cause to armor themselves entirely, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was, in certain lights and certain angles, disconcertingly familiar in a way Sylvie needed a moment to place. Eldon's jaw, Eldon's particular stillness when concentrating on something with her hands. Sylvie stopped breathing for half a step. Lyra looked up. Took them in, 4 people arriving at her fence at dawn with the purposeful energy of people who have traveled to find something specific, and set down her tools with a quietness that suggested she had, on some level, been expecting something like this, even if not this exactly. "You're the Luna," she said, looking at Sylvie. Not a question. "Yes," Sylvie said. Lyra looked at her for a long moment with Eldon's dark eyes. "My father said this day would come eventually," she said. "He didn't say it would be quite so organized." She glanced at Pell, who was already opening a leather satchel with professional focus, and back to Sylvie. "He also didn't say you'd bring a man with documents." "The documents are important," Pell said, without looking up. "I'm sure they are," Lyra said, with the tone of someone who has not yet decided whether to be frightened or simply very awake. She looked back at Sylvie. "Does this mean what my father always said it meant? About who I am?" "Yes," Sylvie said gently. "It does." Lyra exhaled, a long, slow breath that fogged in the cold air and carried in it the specific weight of something confirmed that a part of you already knew. "All right," she said after a moment. "I suppose you'd better come inside." Dot leaned toward Sylvie and said, quietly but not quietly enough, "I like her. She reminds me of someone." Dot. 60 years younger, obviously, but the bones are the same. Dot clicked her walking sticks together with satisfaction. "Excellent bones." Inside, over tea that Lyra made with the brisk efficiency of someone who processes significant information better when her hands are occupied, Pell laid out the documents, and Calder explained the succession covenant, while Sylvie watched the young woman's face move through understanding the way a landscape moves through seasons, not all at once, but in sequence, each layer settling before the next arrived. She asked good questions, precise ones. She did not interrupt, and she did not perform shock she wasn't feeling, which Sylvie respected enormously. "Marcus doesn't know," Lyra said when Calder finished. "Not yet," Calder said. "But he will." "Yes." Lyra turned her cup in her hands. The same gesture Sylvie noticed with a quiet internal earthquake that Eldon had always used when thinking through something he hadn't decided yet. "And when he does," she said slowly, "I become the problem he needs to eliminate. Not Sylvie. Me." The room was quiet. "Which means," Lyra continued, her voice steady in a way that was either courage or the specific calm of someone who has not yet fully felt the thing they are reasoning about, "that staying here is no longer safe. Regardless of what I want." She set down her cup, looked at Sylvie. "What do you need from me?" Sylvie looked at this young woman, Eldon's granddaughter, the kingdom's rightful future, sitting at a farmhouse table in the early morning with frost on her boots and Eldon's stillness in her hands, and felt something enormous and complicated move through her chest. "Right now," Sylvie said, "I need you to come with us. The warden's house boundary will protect you while the seal holds." She paused. "After that, the council convenes, and the kingdom needs to see you." "Publicly," Lyra said. "Publicly." Another long pause. Then Lyra stood, with the decisive physicality of someone who has made a choice and is already acting on it before doubt can find purchase. "Give me 10 minutes to pack," she said. "And someone should tell my father. He will want to know immediately and will be furious that he wasn't consulted and will come around by evening. He is—" She stopped. Something moved across her face, brief, private, tender. "He is very much like his father, apparently." Sylvie felt the corners of her eyes sting. "Yes," she said softly. "He sounds like he is." They were an hour into the return path, Lyra walking between Pell and Dot while Pell explained covenant law with considerable enthusiasm, and Dot interjected with corrections that were entirely accurate and delivered with maximum comedic weight, when Calder fell back to walk beside Sylvie and said quietly, "Marcus knows." She looked at him. His riders passed the northern junction 20 minutes ago, Calder said. Moving east. He kept his voice level. They're not coming to the warden's house this time. They're going to Ashford. We have an hour's lead, Sylvie said. We do. The seal boundary will hold Lyra once she's inside it. It will. Then we have what we need. Sylvie looked straight ahead at the frozen path, at the pale winter sky above the eastern forest, at the long road back to the warden's house and everything waiting there. Calder. When the riders find Ashford empty, Marcus will stop sending riders. She paused. He will come himself. Calder was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I think he will. Good, Sylvie said. He looked at her. I have been waiting, she said simply, for the chance to look my grandson in the eye and show him exactly what he miscalculated. She glanced sideways at Calder, and something in her expression was not gentle and not angry, but entirely calmly certain. 60 years of keeping this kingdom breathing, and he thought he could end it with a closed gate. A pause. He has never seen me work. Calder held her gaze for a long moment. No, he said. He hasn't. The silver mark on her wrist pulsed, warm and bright and absolutely ready. Marcus arrived on the 4th day, not with 4 riders this time, with 12, and with the particular expression of a man who has run out of indirect approaches and has decided that presence, sheer, undeniable, physical presence, will accomplish what letters and riders and lies have not. He rode at the front of the column with his chin up and his kingdom colors sharp in the cold morning air, and he stopped at the silver boundary line with the controlled frustration of someone who has been stopped at it before and has not yet accepted that this will keep happening. Sylvie was already outside. She had been up since before dawn, not from sleeplessness, but from the specific alertness that comes when a long-approaching thing is finally arriving, and the body knows it before the mind confirms it. She had dressed carefully, not in the worn travel clothes of the past 4 days, but in the pine-green wool that Eldon had always loved, with her silver-marked wrist unhidden and the plain silver ring on her right hand where Eldon had worn it for 40 years. She stood in the center of the clearing with the warden's house at her back, and the boundary line of the seal between her and her grandson, and the absolute stillness of someone who has nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. Behind her, Lyra stood at the doorway. Dot stood to the left, walking sticks planted, expression carrying the specific energy of a woman who has been waiting for this moment and intends to enjoy it fully. Calder stood to the right, gray coat, dark eyes, the unhurried stillness of a man who is prepared for whatever comes next and has made his choice about which side of the line he is standing on. Marcus looked at all of them. His gaze traveled from Calder to Dot to Lyra, pausing on Lyra with a flicker of something that was not recognition yet, but was the beginning of it. And then settled on Sylvie. "Grandmother," he said. His voice was controlled and cold. "This is resolved today." "Yes," Sylvie agreed. "It does." Something in her tone made him still. He had expected argument, she could see that, had prepared for resistance, for negotiation, for the careful defensive maneuvering of someone trying to hold a position. He had not prepared for agreement delivered with absolute serenity. "The council convenes in 3 days," he said. "You cannot stop that." "I'm not trying to," Sylvie said. "I called it." A pause. The decree of regency authorizes the lunar regent to convene the full council at her discretion." She held his gaze steadily. "I sent the formal convocation 2 days ago, with the 7 Eastern elder signatures." She paused. "With the widow's seal documentation. With the full succession covenant." Another pause, deliberate and measured. "And with the registration record of Eldon's firstborn son and his daughter, whose name is Lyra, and who stands behind me, and who is, under the original covenant law that your succession claim depends on, your senior in the line of succession by 40 years and 1 generation." The silence that followed was the particular silence of something structural giving way. Marcus's gaze cut to Lyra again. This time the recognition arrived fully, and Sylvie watched it land. The jaw, the eyes, the particular stillness that was unmistakably Eldon's, and watched her grandson understand in real time that the ground he had been standing on had never been as solid as he believed. "That is not possible," he said. "And yet," Sylvie said, "here she is." Marcus's composure fractured, not completely, not dramatically, but at the edges, the way ice fractures before it breaks, in the specific places where the pressure has always been greatest. "You think you can walk back in here," he said, and his voice had dropped to something lower and rawer than the controlled tone he had arrived with. After everything, after 60 years of standing in his shadow, letting him be the name everyone remembered. "Marcus." Her voice was very quiet. "Stop." He stopped. "I know what you believe," she said. "You believe I was diminished by loving him. That a woman who stood beside a powerful man for 60 years must have been consumed by it, must have lost herself." She looked at her grandson, really looked at him, the way she had looked at him since he was young, seeing both what he was and what he could not seem to stop himself from being. "You are wrong. And more than that, you are describing something you invented because it made what you were doing easier to justify." Marcus said nothing. "Your grandfather did not make me less," Sylvie said. "He made room. There is a difference, and you have never understood it. And that, more than the ambition, more than the writers, more than the lie you sent through the villages, that is the thing that tells me you are not ready for this throne." She let that settle. "Not because you are cruel, because you are still so afraid of being overshadowed that you would rather destroy than share." The 12 riders behind Marcus were very still. Marcus himself was very still. And then, and this was the thing Sylvie had not entirely anticipated, the thing that cracked her own composure slightly at its most careful edge, something in his face changed. Not to anger, not to renewed resolve, to something younger. Something that had been underneath the ambition all along, unaddressed and therefore metastasizing into everything it had become. Fear. Real, unguarded, exhausted fear. "He never looked at me the way he looked at you," Marcus said. The words came out rough and unfinished, as though they had been waiting in a place with no exit and had finally found one. "Not once, not in 30 years. He stopped. His jaw worked. "Everything I did, every decision, it was never enough. You were always the one he..." He stopped himself, pulled the control back over his face like a curtain. But it was too late. The curtain had been open, and everyone on both sides of the silver line had seen what was behind it. Sylvie felt the complicated grief of someone who has just understood a wound they could not have healed even if they had known it was there. "Marcus," she said quietly, "that was never about me." He looked at her, one long, stripped-back moment, and then looked away. "The council convenes in 3 days," he said, his voice back to its controlled register, but thinner now, worn at the edges. "I will be there." "So will I," Sylvie said. "So will Lyra. So will the Eastern Elders and the Warden testimony and the full decree of Regency." A pause. "Come prepared to listen. For once in your life, just listen." Marcus turned his horse. 12 riders followed. The silver boundary line held, steady and unhurried, until the last of them had disappeared around the eastern bend. Then Dot exhaled, a long, slow breath that contained approximately 4 days of compressed tension. "I have attended 47 council proceedings, 6 succession challenges, and 1 extraordinarily complicated boundary dispute involving 3 families and a goat," she announced, to no one in particular. "That was the finest thing I have ever personally witnessed." Lyra from the doorway said, "Is it always like this?" "No," Dot said. Usually there is considerably more shouting and considerably less dignity. She looked at Sylvie. She does this to rooms. I've been watching it happen for 4 days. You get used to it. Sylvie turned back to the house and found Calder standing directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold morning air. He said nothing. He simply looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and in them was something that required no words and no ceremony and no careful management. Just recognition. Clean and certain and fully present. She did not step back. Neither did he. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he agreed. And the silver mark on her wrist pulsed, bright and warm and unhurried, like a promise made by something ancient and patient, finally arriving at its answer. The kingdom's great hall had not changed. That was the first thing Sylvie noticed as she crossed the threshold for the first time in 5 days. 5 days that had rearranged the entire architecture of her life and apparently left the hall itself entirely indifferent. The same high stone walls, the same long council table worn smooth by generations of hands, the same cold morning light coming down from the high windows in those familiar level shafts that had always made the room feel like a place where things were supposed to be decided and meant. She had walked into this hall for 60 years at Eldon's side. She walked into it now at her own. Behind her came Calder, steady and unhurried as he had been since the moment she first saw him at the tree line. Then Lyra, in the clean clothes she had packed from Ashford, moving with the quiet, intentional composure of someone who has decided to be equal to whatever they are walking into. Then Pell, leather satchels in both hands, document ready and entirely in his element. And Dot, walking sticks clicking against the stone floor in a rhythm that echoed through the hall with the cheerful authority of someone who has arrived and would like that acknowledged. The 12 council elders were already seated. 7 Eastern representatives that Calder had reached. 5 from the kingdom's inner circle, some of whom, Sylvie noted with a careful internal assessment, were wearing the particular expression of people who had received Marcus's version of events and were now recalibrating at speed. Marcus sat at the far end of the table. He looked, Sylvie thought, like a man who had not slept well in 5 days. The controlled cold of his courtyard demeanor was still present, but thinner, the way a frozen river is thinner in the places where the current runs hardest underneath. He watched her cross the room with an expression she had been turning over since the morning at the boundary line. Not hatred, not contempt. Something harder to categorize and, ultimately, harder to dismiss. A man who had wanted his grandfather's love and taken the wrong road trying to earn it. Sylvie had thought about that in the quiet hours of the 3rd night and had arrived at something that surprised her with its clarity. She was not going to destroy Marcus today. She was going to do something considerably more difficult. She was going to tell the truth, all of it, plainly and completely, and let the truth do what truth does when it is finally given enough room. She took her seat at the head of the table. The council chamber went still. Pell presented the documents first: the decree of regency, the widow's seal activation record, the succession covenant, and the registration of Corwin and Lyra in the Outer Settlement Index. He did this with the precise, unhurried competence of a man who has spent his career making sure important things are properly understood, and he answered every procedural question from the inner council members with a patience that Sylvie found genuinely admirable, given that at least 2 of the questions were, charitably, not very good questions. Then the Eastern elders confirmed their signatures. Then Dot, called as senior warden, gave formal testimony on the seal's activation, its legal weight, and what it meant that it had held against Marcus's riders at full boundary strength, which, she explained, had not happened in recorded warden history, and which she wanted the council to understand, was not a bureaucratic footnote, but an event of considerable supernatural significance that deserved to be treated as such. She said all of this with complete professional gravity and only one moment of editorial commentary, which was when an inner council member suggested that the seal might have been activated in error, and Dot looked at him with the pale gray precision of someone taking extremely careful aim and said, "The covenant that built this kingdom does not make errors. People make errors. The covenant simply responds to them." The inner council member did not ask further questions. And then Sylvie stood. She did not use notes. She did not use the formal council language of declarations and whereas clauses and procedural citations. She spoke the way she had spoken at the boundary line, quietly, directly, without armor and without theater. Because the truth she had learned in 82 years does not need decoration. It only needs space. She told them about the morning Marcus had put her box on the floor and told her to be gone before the council arrived. She told them what Eldon had left in the attic, not as an accusation against Marcus, but as a testimony to what Eldon had known and how he had prepared. She told them about the lie sent through the villages, and about Hessa the baker's widow who had walked through it and come for tea, and about the 11 people who had chosen the warden's house before anyone asked them to. She told them about Corwin, Eldon's son, the livestock farmer in the eastern settlement, who had spent his life in the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth and had never required anyone else to confirm it. She spoke of him with a tenderness that surprised even her. Not grief, not resentment, but something that had been working its way toward understanding for 5 days and had arrived. And then she said the thing she had been turning over since the boundary line, in the words she had finally found for it. "Marcus removed me from this house because he was afraid," she said, and her voice carried through the stone hall without effort, without performance, with the full weight of 60 years of knowing exactly what she was doing in a room. Not because he is evil, because he has spent his entire life measuring himself against a man he could not reach, and instead of asking why the distance felt so great, he decided to eliminate the witnesses. She paused. "I am not asking this council to punish my grandson. I am asking them to make the decision that this kingdom's covenant requires, clearly, fully, and on the record, so that no one in this room or outside of it has any remaining confusion about what the law says and what the law means." She sat down. The hall was very quiet. Then, from the far end of the table, Marcus said, and his voice was stripped of everything except the bare fact of the words, "I want to speak." Sylvie looked at him. "Speak," she said. What Marcus said was not a legal argument. It was not a procedural challenge or a succession claim or any of the things he had clearly arrived prepared to deliver. It was shorter than any of those things and considerably harder. He said that he had been wrong. Not strategically, morally. He said that he had told himself a story about his grandmother's complicity in his grandfather's favoritism, and that hearing her speak just now had made it impossible to continue believing that story, because the woman who had just stood up in that hall was not a woman who had been diminished by anyone, ever, and he had known that, and had needed her to seem diminished because the alternative, that Eldon had simply loved her with everything he had, completely and without reservation, and that Marcus had never found a way to earn a fraction of that, was something he had not been able to face. He said he was sorry, not to the council, to Sylvie. The hall absorbed this in the particular silence of something unexpected, landing in a place that was prepared for something else entirely. Sylvie looked at her grandson for a long moment, at the strong jaw and the wrong choices, and the real fear underneath all of it, finally visible and finally spoken, and felt the specific weight of loving someone who has hurt you and understanding at the same moment exactly why they did it. "I know," she said gently. "Eldon knew too. It's in the letter he left you." She paused. "You haven't read it yet." Marcus went very still. "He left me a letter. In the iron box, underneath the decree." She held his gaze. "He wrote to everyone he loved, Marcus, including you. He just needed you to find it after you had stopped being afraid long enough to read it properly." Something crossed her grandson's face that she had not seen there in a very long time. Something young and undone and beginning. The council voted at midday. Unanimous. All 12 elders, inner and eastern both. The decree of regency confirmed. Lyra formally recognized as first in the succession line under original covenant law. Marcus's acts since Eldon's death formally voided with the provision, proposed by Sylvie and accepted without objection, that he be given the opportunity to serve the kingdom in a formal advisory capacity under the new regency, answering to the council and to the Luna, for a period of 2 years, after which his standing would be reviewed. Not punishment, not destruction. Accountability with a door left open. When the vote was announced, Lyra, who had sat through the entire proceeding with Eldon's stillness and her own particular steadiness, exhaled a long breath and looked at Sylvie with eyes that were very bright and not entirely dry. "Is it always this?" she started. "No," Sylvie said. "Usually it takes considerably longer." "She does this to rooms," Dot said, from her seat to the left, and helped herself to the water glass in front of her with the serene satisfaction of a woman who has been vindicated by events and intends to enjoy it. And then the hall doors opened, and a man walked in who had not been there at the start of the session. Older, weathered with dark eyes, and a jaw that made 3 people at the council table do a quiet double-take. Corwin, Eldon's son, Lyra's father. He stood in the doorway in his working clothes, hat in hand, and looked at the room with the expression of a man who has driven hard through cold roads since before sunrise, and has arrived exactly where he intended. His eyes found Sylvie. She rose from her chair. They stood across the hall from each other, the Luna and the man who carried Eldon's face and Eldon's silence and 40 years of a complicated inheritance that neither of them had chosen. And the distance between them was exactly the length of everything that needed to be said before anything else could begin. Sylvie crossed it. She took both his hands in hers, the way she had held Eldon's hands 10,000 times, and looked at this stranger who was not a stranger, this son of her husband who had lived his whole life in a quiet place just outside everything she had known. "I'm glad you came," she said. Corwin's throat moved. "He wrote to me too," he said. His voice was lower than Eldon's, but shaped the same way. He said you deserved to know me. That he was sorry he had never found the courage to introduce us himself. He stopped, started again. He said you were the finest person he had ever known, and that if I was lucky, you might— He stopped again, his composure working hard. That you might be willing to be family. Sylvie felt 82 years of living press against the back of her eyes all at once. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady with the specific steadiness of someone who has been through the worst of something and is standing on the other side of it, clear-eyed and whole. "I think I would like that very much." 6 months later, the Eastern Road had been repaired. It had needed it for years, the stones uneven, the drainage poor, the whole stretch between the village and the warden's house, a reliable source of complaints from anyone who traveled it regularly, and of minor injuries to anyone who traveled it at dusk. The repair had been one of the first acts of the Regency Council, proposed by Sylvie in her first formal session and passed in approximately 4 minutes, which was, Pell noted in the official record with quiet satisfaction, the fastest vote in council history. Dot had pointed out that the road had been needing repair since before Marcus was born, and that if it had been repaired then, she would have arrived at the warden's house boundary considerably faster and with less hip complaint, and that this was therefore a matter of historical significance. The council had chosen not to include that in the official record. Pell had included it anyway, in a footnote. The warden's house was no longer empty. It had, over 6 months, acquired the particular character of a place that is genuinely lived in, not managed, not maintained, but inhabited by people who have chosen it and made it theirs. Hessa's bread appeared on the table 3 mornings a week. Ord, the blacksmith, had replaced the front door hinges with ones that actually worked, had accepted no payment for this, and had subsequently fixed 4 other things without being asked, which Sylvie had chosen to interpret as affection expressed in the language of metalwork. Pell had organized the attic into an archive of such precision and beauty that he sometimes went up there simply to look at it, which everyone pretended not to notice because it clearly made him happy. Lyra came twice a week from the kingdom seat, where she was learning the work of governance with the focused intentionality of someone who has discovered that she is very good at something she hadn't known she was meant to do. She had Eldon's stillness in meetings and her father's directness in private, and her own particular quality, a patience with people that did not come from softness, but from genuine interest, a real desire to understand what someone meant before deciding what to do about it. That was entirely her own. The inner council members who had arrived at the first session prepared to be skeptical had, in the weeks since, become something approaching devoted. Not because Lyra performed for them. Because she didn't. Marcus was in the eastern settlements. He had gone voluntarily, 3 weeks after the council session, asking for an assignment that would take him away from the kingdom seat for a while. Sylvie had given him the eastern boundary documentation work, traveling the outer settlements, recording disputes, bringing reports back to the council. Hard work, useful work. The kind of work that requires you to listen more than you speak. He had not complained. He had written 2 letters since leaving, one to the council, formal and precise, and one to Sylvie, which was shorter and less certain and considerably more honest. She had written back. The correspondence had the careful quality of 2 people finding the language for something they had never talked about before, and that was exactly what it was. Corwin visited on the last Sunday of each month. He always arrived with something from the settlement, dried herbs, a repaired piece of kitchen equipment, once a very old and very beautiful iron kettle that had apparently belonged to his mother and that he had decided, after apparent considerable thought, should live at the warden's house. He and Sylvie had developed the particular ease of people who have skipped the early awkwardness by mutual agreement and proceeded directly to the part where they are simply glad the other one exists. He was quieter than Eldon, less insufferably prepared, more willing to sit in silence without filling it, which Sylvie found unexpectedly, like breathing out after holding her breath for a very long time. He had read his father's letter. He had not told Sylvie what it said, and she had not asked. Some things between a father and a son belong only to them, but something in Corwin had settled, in the weeks after reading it, in the specific way that things settle when a weight has finally been named and can therefore, at last, be set down. On a morning in early summer, the frost finally gone, the eastern oaks in full leaf, the air carrying for the first time in months the warmth of a season that had decided to stay. Sylvie sat on the stone bench outside the warden's house front door and read the last letter in the worn wooden box. She had been saving it. She knew that, and had been honest with herself about it. There was one letter she had not yet opened, not from Eldon's scroll, not from the iron box, but from the small inner pocket of the box's lining, where she had found it on the second morning and had known, with the precise knowledge of someone who has been married for 60 years, that she was not yet ready to read it. She was ready now. She opened it. It was the shortest letter in the box. 2 paragraphs. Eldon's handwriting, but looser than the formal scroll, the way his writing looked when he was tired, or when he was writing something that cost him something, or both. My Sylvie, you have done everything I asked and more, because you always do. The kingdom is in good hands, yours, and will be in good hands after, because you will have made sure of it. That is who you are. That will never change. What I want you to know, the thing I should have said more in the years when I had the time to say it, is this. You were never the Luna to me first. You were Sylvie first. The woman who argued with me about road repairs on our 3rd meeting and was completely right about it, and never let me forget it. The woman who held my hand under every council table and made every difficult thing possible. I was the Alpha King. You were the reason it meant anything. Be happy. Not for me, for you. You have earned the full weight of a life that belongs entirely to yourself now. and I hope very much that you fill it with people who deserve to be in it. I love you. I always will. Eldon Sylvie folded the letter, held it against her chest for a long moment, eyes closed, the early summer sun warm on her face, the sound of the eastern oaks moving in the light wind, the distant click of Dot's walking sticks inside the house, indicating that the morning was proceeding and tea was likely imminent. Then she opened her eyes. Calder was sitting on the bench beside her. He had arrived at some point in the last few minutes with the quiet naturalness that she had come to recognize as simply how he moved through the world, without announcement, without ceremony, simply present when presence was what was needed. He had a cup of tea in each hand. He held one out to her without speaking. She took it. They sat in the morning sun for a while without speaking, which was something they had become very good at over 6 months of working beside each other, arguing about the Eastern boundary reports, disagreeing productively about at least 3 council decisions, and sharing the particular intimacy of people who have been through something significant together and emerged from it knowing each other in the way that cannot be manufactured or rushed. The silver mark on Sylvie's wrist had changed in the months since the council session. Not faded, deepened, settled into her skin the way old things settle, with less drama and more permanence. It pulsed very gently in the morning warmth, like a heartbeat at rest, like something that had finished being urgent and had become simply present, simply hers. "Calder," she said. "Yes." She looked at him, at the weathered face and the dark, steady eyes, and the expression that had stopped trying to be only careful, and had, some weeks ago, given up the pretense, and simply been what it was. "Eldon asked you to stand beside me," she said, "not in front." "Yes," he said, "you have done that." She paused. "For 6 months, you have done exactly that." "I know what I agreed to," he said. "I know you do." She turned the teacup slowly in both hands, and then set it down on the bench beside her, and looked at him fully, with the complete and unguarded directness of a woman who has spent 82 years learning when to be careful, and has finally arrived at a moment that does not require it. "I am asking you now if you would like to do something different. Not instead of that." She paused. "In addition to it." Calder was very still. "Sylvie," he said, and her name and his voice had the quality of something handled with great care. "I walked 3 days through winter forest because Eldon wrote to me." He paused. "I would have walked considerably farther if he had asked, and I would walk it again, not because he asked, because of who I found at the end of the road." The silver mark on her wrist pulsed, warm, bright, full, not urgent, not searching. Arrived. She reached over and took his hand, slowly, clearly, with full intention, the way a woman takes a hand when she means it and wants there to be no confusion about that. His fingers closed around hers with a warmth that was solid and real and unhurried, and they sat like that in the early summer morning, the two of them, while the eastern oaks moved overhead and the old boundary road stretched out in both directions, repaired and smooth, and going somewhere worth going. Inside the warden's house, Dot's walking sticks went abruptly silent. Then her voice carried through the open window with the triumphant clarity of a woman who has been waiting 6 months for a specific development and is very pleased with herself about it. "Finally." Sylvie closed her eyes. Calder's quiet laugh moved through the morning air like something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment. "She knew," he said. "She has known since the first morning," Sylvie said. "She told me her hip stopped hurting." "And did it?" Sylvie opened her eyes and looked at the eastern forest, at the long green light between the trees, at the road, at the summer sky above it all, clear and deep and endlessly patient. "I think," she said quietly, "that some things heal when they are finally in the right place." She squeezed his hand once. "I think Eldon knew that too." The widow's seal pulsed on her wrist, one long, warm, final beat, like a held note resolving into silence, like a door that has finished opening and can now simply stay open. And somewhere in the attic above them, in the clean-preserved room where the iron box sat empty and the scrolls rested in Pell's careful archive, and the plain silver ring lay in its cloth beside the dried winter sage, the cedar smell was softer now, warmer, less like preservation and more like memory, less like waiting, more like peace. To everyone listening, this story was about a woman who lost everything in a single morning and discovered, in the weeks that followed, that everything she had ever been was still entirely intact. Sylvie didn't need to be rescued. She needed to be reminded, by an old friend with bad hips, by a stranger who walked through winter, by a granddaughter she didn't know she had, and by the letters of a man who had spent his last months making sure the people he loved would find each other. If any part of this story stayed with you, the morning she walked through the gate and didn't look back, or the moment the seal lit up the boundary line, or Eldon's letter, or Dot's hip, or the hand finally taken on a summer morning, I would love to hear which one. And if you want more stories about women who were told they were finished and turned out to be only just beginning, tell me. I'll be here.